So, basically fight between the UK and Russia as to what exactly happened in Salisbury, who poisoned the former ex-KGB agent and his daughter, Yulia. Yulia Skripal is now, out of danger. She is awake. As far as her father is concerned, he is still in a coma. But who poisoned him? Let's speak to the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, Craig Murray. He joins us live from Edinburgh. Hello to you, Mr. Murray. Thank you for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Who did it, do you think?
Well, we don't know. There are a range of possible suspects, of which both the Russian state and Russian non-state actors have to be among the suspects. But there are many other possibilities, including, of course, the obvious possibility that somebody did it in order to try to damage Russia by making it look like them.
Who else apart from Russia?
Well, this nerve agent was, if it is a Novichok, and the excellent interview you did yesterday with the scientist from Porton Down said it was a Novichok or of that family, and Novichoks have been produced in a number of countries, including in Iran recently, which was reported to the OPCW by the Iranians. The Soviet facility at Nukus in Uzbekistan, which I visited while I was ambassador there, after it had been decommissioned by the Americans, had people working at it from all over the Soviet Union, including, for example, Ukrainians. And it's perfectly possible that Ukrainians may wish to damage Russia's reputation, given that Russia annexed Crimea a little while ago. So
let me just explore that with you, if I may, please, Mr. Murray. Lots of time, so we can talk as long as you like. Let me just explore that with you. Why would Ukraine do this on British soil and potentially murder a British police officer at the same time?
Well, I don't think whoever did it had any particular interest in injuring the British police officer. That was obviously, as we say when we kill people with drones abroad and kill innocent people at the same time, we call it collateral damage.
I'm aware of the term.
Yes, well, I fear the police officer was collateral damage. He obviously wasn't targeted. I'm not saying Ukraine did it. Don't get me wrong.
Okay.
What I'm saying is Ukraine has is one of many countries which has a capability to produce this, which had scientists working in the laboratories which used to produce it in Soviet times. And it is pretty obvious to everybody that the Ukraine, for example, would have a strong interest in damaging Russia internationally, given that they're engaged in a proxy war.
But not necessarily with one of its allies, which is Britain, when Britain has supported Ukraine in its tussle, its battle, its fight, its war with Russia.
Yes, but this hasn't actually caused any conflict between Britain and Ukraine, has it? Whereas it has caused enormous international embarrassment to Russia just before the World Cup, which it is rather unlikely that Russia would wish to bring upon itself. I'm not saying it's not Russia. That is a possibility. But that there are no other possibilities is obviously a nonsense. Russia is also engaged, obviously, heavily in Syria, and that brings it into conflict with the interests of a number of countries in that region who may wish to damage Russia internationally. So there are plenty of possibilities, both in terms of motivation and in terms of the ability to produce the substance.
Was it Britain?
I very much doubt it. We don't know. That there is no evidence, actual evidence, produced at this time of who did it. And until we actually get some evidence, then I'm maintaining an open mind.
OK. Apart from what we heard from the head of Porton Down yesterday, there are other planks, presumably, of evidence as well, which is why Britain has come to the conclusion, the British government has come to the conclusion that it was Russia. That, presumably, that information has been shared with our European and Western allies, which is why they have chosen to believe that and, as a result, expel Russian diplomats. So it's not just what we heard from Porton Down, is the argument that we're hearing from the government.
Yes, you're right. That is the argument we are hearing. We're hearing it is backed up by intelligence that they have. And it's true that they have managed to convince NATO allies in particular to join them in taking some action. Well, I was in the Foreign Office when we had intelligence information on Iraqi WMD. And that Iraqi WMD intelligence was shared with other nations and succeeded in convincing some of them to actually go further than expelling diplomats, join in military action against Iraq. And it turned out to be a pack of lies. So I am never again going to have much time for anybody who makes the mistake of saying, well, the government have intelligence that says this, therefore it must be correct. We have to maintain skepticism until we see something that actually convinces us. And so far, I have seen nothing which convinces me.
So you think that it's a reasonable comparison, the suggestion that the weapons of mass destruction were being hidden by the Iraqi regime compared to Novichok being used to potentially trying to kill an ex-KGB agent in Salisbury?
What is the reasonable comparison is the fact that when government tells you that it knows this because it has intelligence information, Iraq shows us we can't always trust them, and we would be foolish to trust them without more evidence, proper evidence being given. This is supposed to be a police investigation. This was a crime. Police investigations proceed by forensics. They proceed by finding out who actually did it, who administered the substance, and they go on a criminal standard of proof. What I want to see is results of an actual investigation with actual evidence that would stand up in court. That's what we should be looking to here, not some wild accusations thrown about by Boris Johnson.
Presumably, I'm guessing that continues on while the war of diplomacy rages in the United Nations and other parts of the globe as well. And I suppose people will also be looking at the historical context of the fact that previously NOV agents have been used to kill former KGB spies, and polonium-210 was used to kill a former KGB spy on British soil.
That's certainly true. And as it happens, I think it was almost certainly a Russian actor, and probably a Russian state actor, who was responsible for the murder of Litvinenko. But that does not prove that that's what happened in this case. We need to beware of the round up the usual suspects mentality. Let me put this to you. Boris Johnson has said that the British government has evidence that for 10 years, Russia was stockpiling secretly Novichok in a 10-year program, and was also training assassins in secret assassination attempts using Novichok. Well, that kind of program would cost tens of millions and probably hundreds of millions of dollars. Why would you then blow it and make it public after keeping it secret for 10 years by just using it to murder or attempt to murder an old retired chap who lives in Salisbury who you let out of jail years ago? It really is. I mean, that is actually the weirdest conspiracy theory I've heard in this entire affair.
Don't know is the answer, but I'm sure that in the fullness of time it will all become apparent. I wonder what you think of the head of Porton Down's interview yesterday. I know that you've watched it in some detail and at length. What did you make of what he had to say?
Well, I would start by saying that I would like to congratulate Sky and congratulate their interviewer for their persistence in continually asking him again and again whether he was saying that they could not prove it was made in Russia, in the face of his answers, which were rather evasive and were designed to avoid giving the answer that was obviously true, that no, we cannot prove these are made in Russia. And in the end, that was made fairly plain by your interviewer. So may I congratulate your organisation on that to start with. I think that the insistence on getting in statements like it was probably a state actor who made the Novichok, which is dubious, was slightly worrying. It was also rather strange to me that at one stage he said that it was not Porton Down's job to identify who made it, which is not true. It is actually Porton Down's job. They are the British representatives on the Scientific Advisory Committee of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and establishing who is making what chemical weapon where is very much a key part of their remit. But having said it wasn't their job to do that, he went on later in the interview to say actually they were still working on doing it. So I thought there were some evasions in his questions, but I thought in general your man did an extremely good job on getting the true facts.
Just to clarify, as far as Novichok, there are lots of strains of Novichok. In order to find out where the particular strain of Novichok came from that has potentially killed this ex-KGB spy, he's in a coma at the moment and threatened the life of his daughter and potentially a British police officer as well. You need to have the original strain in order to make the comparison. I think is that a reasonable assessment of the situation? Porton Down can't say where it came from unless they have an original sample from where it came from.
Well, I should say that I don't claim any expertise.
No, I'm just asking you, is that your understanding?
Organochemistry. My understanding is that unless you actually have a Russian Novichok, it would be difficult to state that this is precisely from the same batch, for example.
OK, isn't that then what the chief exec said? Isn't that what he's saying? I can't prove it unless I have a strain of the original batch. Is that all he said?
I don't recall him mentioning.
But is that your understanding of what he was trying to say? I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert. You're an expert. That's why you're here. That's why I'm asking your opinion. In order to know where it came from, you have to have the original batch to make the comparison. Is that right?
I'm not sure that's 100% correct, because you can do a certain amount,
What percentage correct do you think it is?
Things. I really don't know. I'm not an organochemist, but what I did hear him say was he cannot prove it comes from Russia, and that why he cannot prove it comes from Russia is somewhat incidental.
Well, it's not incidental, is it? Because he can't prove it unless he has the original batch. And we're slightly going round in circles, and I'm just asking whether you will accept that point, which is, unless you've got the original pattern, if you will, you can't make the comparison with that. So as a result, he can't say that it isn't from Russia, and he can't say that it is from Russia.
It's certainly true that he can't say it isn't from Russia, and I'm not saying it isn't from Russia. It might well be from Russia. I have no idea where it's from, and he has no idea where it's from, and you have no idea where it's from.
But I'm not claiming I'm not claiming otherwise.
No, nor am I. I'm also claiming I don't know where it's from.
OK, because I know that you were quite critical. I mean, you're being very complimentary about our interview now, but I know that you were quite critical, saying that there had been edits and jump cuts, and we potentially had been put in a position where we were being told to ask things by third parties in the room. I mean, I don't know if you can clarify that for us now.
I would love to clarify that. There was a very definite cut to his last sentence. There's a very definite, and people can look at it, they can look at the video of it and check if there's any truth from what I'm saying. And his final statement, where he came out saying it was probably a non-state actor, is not. Sorry, it was probably had to be made by a state actor. That final statement was not in response at all to the question he'd just been asked. Was preceded by a very definite cut and a very definite change of camera angle, and I believe a slight change of camera position. So my point was simply that I think that he was meant to say it was probably a state actor in order to implicate Russia, and that sentence had plainly been tacked on at the end. My supposition is... So
you think that we did... So just to clarify, what are you actually saying there? You're saying that we changed the context of what he was saying?
No, not at all. I'm saying that he added that on later because it plainly was not part of the same answer onto which it was tacked, and anyone can see that.
Can I just clarify that for you, if I may, Mr. Murray? If you'll indulge me for just a moment. There were two cameras rolling. They were rolling the whole time. The tripods didn't move. The question that you're referring to was question 16 of 35. It was about 8 minutes in, and it was not at the end of the interview. Does that in any way quell your fears?
It's interesting to me because the example of the interview, I haven't seen the 16-minute interview, which isn't what you broadcast at the time.
No, sorry, just to clarify, it's not a 16-minute interview. I think that's probably where you're a little bit confused. Question 16 of 35.
Yes, but what my understanding is that those 35 questions, but from what I've read online, 35 questions could not be asked in 3 minutes 46 seconds. The interview which I have seen is the interview which you broadcast on Sky yesterday, which was 3 minutes 46 seconds long, and did not contain 35 questions.
OK. And the fact that we had two cameras rolling the whole time and the tripods, because I don't know if you know much about television, but when you try and move a tripod with a great big heavy camera on it, you are quite aware of how you do it, unless you've got a dolly, which is like a tracking thingy, and we didn't have one of those.
Yes, I actually do know, as it happens, what a tripod is.
I'm sorry. I was looking at our camera so that our viewers at home knew, rather than you. I'm sure that you knew exactly what I was talking about, so forgive me.
That's okay, but I really don't know why you're trying to show that I'm not a television person or an organic
What I'm trying
chemist,
to say to you is that you criticised us. If I may, what I'm trying to say is that you criticised us and tried to suggest that we changed an interview to change the end of a sentence in order for it to potentially distract from what might have been said previously by this gentleman. What I'm trying to say to you in response is that that is absolutely outrageous that you would say that. And as a result, I am illustrating to you that that has not happened. And I mean, if you just want to say, actually, on balance, given the evidence that you've given to me, I accept that, then we can move on.
Plainly, what's happened is that Sky recorded a very long interview with 35 questions.
We did what, sorry?
You recorded a very long
interview.
We did,
you're right.
35 questions.
Yeah.
You then cut it down to a piece which you broadcast, which I saw, which was 3 minutes 46 seconds long. Therefore, there were edits in it. And that's it. And I accept that what you said happened.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. It's just that I know that you were talking about us, on other broadcasters, and I just wanted to clarify that we didn't do what you claimed that we'd done. If I may go back to the story about Russia now, and indeed, if in the fullness of time it is proven that Russia was responsible, not saying they were, but if they were responsible, what sanctions do you think should be taken?
Well, I think if it were proven that Russia were responsible, then the sanctions which the British government has taken so far are wholly inadequate. It doesn't actually help it doesn't do much to expel a few diplomats. Diplomats are not terrifically useful. I was one myself, and a few more or less doesn't make an enormous difference. So I think that if it were in the fullness of time to be proven that Russia was responsible, we should take much tougher action, including action against the Russian oligarchs who openly flaunt their enormous wealth in London and buy properties here.
Mm. And if it's proven in the fullness of time that it wasn't Russia, should the Prime Minister resign?
Certainly, and Boris Johnson should resign, and the whole cabinet should resign, and we should have a general election. I think much of the country would welcome that.
Good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. We appreciate you taking the time. Thank you. Let us know. Thank you. Let us know your thoughts on that, or indeed anything else that we are covering here on Sky News this afternoon. Tragic news. A man in his 70s has been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of a man who was stabbed during a suspected burglary. 78-year-old from Hither Green, South London, was apparently woken by noises of a break-in, discovered two intruders in his home. One suspect died after being stabbed in the chest. Live to Hither Green in Lewisham now, and Joe Tidy is standing by for us. Hello to you, Joe. What happened?